So you guys have mentioned that there's so little to gain from a pro day in so many ways, which is significant because Marvin Harrison Jr., who some are saying is one of, if not the best wide receiver we've ever seen.
Different position.
But Marvin Harrison Jr. has elected not to work. He's not going to participate in pro day at all for Ohio State. So remember, he didn't participate at the combine. He's not participating now with the Ohio State pro day. C-Rob, is this a big deal?
Everybody's going to be pissed. We're not allowed to say this anymore. Everybody can do whatever they want and, screw the system and how it's set up and just watch the tape. And that should be enough. I don't agree with that. Okay. I think you can pick and choose. Like, okay, if you don't want to do it at the combine, that's fine, but you got to do it at your pro day. Like what you're not doing in one spot, I think it's productive for you to do it in another. Maybe you don't have to do everything, but to do nothing. Okay. And I think here's my issue with this now. Marvin Harrison Jr. has not run a 40. He hasn't done a vert. He hasn't done a 3-cone. He hasn't run a gauntlet. He hasn't. And everyone's going to say, well, just look at the film. Just look at the film. That's fine. I understand that. A film is a massive component. But I still think it's important for some of the drill work to be done for the analytics of it. We all talk about how analytics is important. I think that you want to give them a data set that they can then sit down and go, okay, he's in the 98th percentile in this. No player at this position has ever been less than X at the 98th percentile, given the rest of his package, given his tape and all these different things. So, yeah, I think it's a red flag. And I think it's a red flag considering that maybe he's got a guarantee, right? You think maybe the agent's already been told by the Cardinals or whoever, you're not going below us. You're locked in. Don't do anything. We're taking you. Okay, Malik Neighbors is going to run, right? As far as I know, he's going to go during the LSU workout, and he's going to run. He's going to do the agility drills and stuff. Malik Neighbors is a really damn good player. And there are people in the personnel community who believe Malik Neighbors is actually a better prospect than Marvin Harrison Jr. We've just been waiting on Marvin Harrison Jr. for so long and become so infatuated with him for all these, reasons. He goes on the field and he plays at a star, level for years. That's understandable, but that doesn't mean there's not competition in the class. Maybe he doesn't care about that. We'll see how this all turns out. Okay. And if he comes into the league and he's a star and he's an all-pro player or whatever, nobody's going to care. But I can tell you this, if he comes in and, hey, all of a sudden you're realizing maybe he does run a 4.6 40 and it shows up a little more in the NFL level where everybody's running with is faster than the guys he was playing against in the Big Ten. Maybe he's, not as clean a catcher as everybody thinks. Maybe there's just certain things that start to pop out on the NFL level. People are going to look back at this process and they're going to go, that's why we got to have even the most polished players. We got to have them going through the process so that we can see them up close and start to add that to the rest of the data set. That's my only problem with it. Again, if he stars, no one's going to give a but if he doesn't, this is going to get picked apart. The fact that he literally did nothing for nobody. And I know nobody cares about this either. I don't know when the last time was he talked to any reporters either, right? No one's asked him any questions. Like, I care about that. We care about that. Probably fans don't care. But I also think that's an important part of the process as well, because his dad's a Hall of Famer, also had a track record of not wanting to speak to the media or just bristling. I'm curious if that is also what his profile is going to be like at the next level.
C-Rob, do you think that if somehow Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't the first receiver off the board, that it's for sure Neighbors, or does Rome Odunze have a chance to? I was talking again to Scout and about asking him something I had heard, and I'm like, hey, I heard Rome was doing this and this and this, and some each teams, do you know? And he said, I don't know about that in particular, but it sounds like Rome always doing everything extra, which when I hear that kind of sounds the opposite of what we're saying Marvin's doing right now. Do you think it's like three-way? Is it really one way, or are they 2A and 2B?
I think Marvin and Malik, to me, when I've taught, and we're starting to do all these calls for the all juice team, I think they're considered on that top tier of wide receivers. And like Odunze's very, very close, but not quite on their level. Now, I don't know if that will change over time. I can tell you that when we were at the combine, probably the one, and we didn't get a chance to talk to Marvin Harrison, but Odunze was so impressive. Like, I mean, just his charisma, the thoughtfulness he had when he answered questions. There were times where he even challenged like reporters, like not in like a combative way, but just sort of like, hey, I'm interacting, I'm paying attention here, I'm using my brain and not just reading in my mind off a script that my agent taught me. I thought he was great. And I thought, this is a guy who's going to end up sitting in these meeting rooms, and it'll be that gravitational experience where people will get sucked in and they'll get closer to him sitting in that chair, asking him questions, because that's just kind of the charisma that he brings to the table. So, but in terms of the athletic profile, I think Neighbors just showcased so much last year at LSU, and it wasn't just last year. He's got a deep resume like Marvin Harrison Jr. does. I think they're seen as such prolific players, and they played and particularly LSU, you played high-level defenses in the SEC constantly. There are a lot of weapons at LSU. Brian Thomas is another guy that's probably going to go in the first round in terms of a wide receiver. But, Neighbors was matched up against the best corners in the country and was a prolific player. So I do think they're close. I do not think I would be shocked if Neighbors were to somehow get himself to wide receiver 1 over Harrison.
The fact that they're close is part of why this is an important conversation. Also, two things that you've said, Rob, that I think are important here. One, you're right. Fans aren't going to care that he's not talking to the media unless he doesn't work out. Like if he's a successful player, fans don't care about anything. Right. If for some reason Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't great, then fans are going to look at all of this and say, well, why didn't you tell us? Why wasn't a red flag? So that's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I do think there's an important pushback that I would give to the world that says he can do whatever he wants. You're right. In a player empowerment world, if he doesn't want to work out, he has that right. If a GM or a scout from a team isn't comfortable with that, they have that right also to say, man, you're great. And I think your film's great, but I just want to be able to see these things that I'm used to seeing. And I don't think, that's asking too much, understanding that if a team decides to pass on him simply because they're not comfortable not having had these things, just as he has the right to not work out, I think that does give a team the right, should they look at him and say, hey, I think you're great, but you didn't want to do these things, and that makes me uncomfortable. So for that reason, there's another wide receiver here almost as good or as good. I'm going to go with something I feel more comfortable with.
He will be the rare player. I will bet you it won't matter. We'll say all this, and I know I'm like, everything that I've just said, it makes it sound like, I'm just bullshit. He's so good. It's not going to matter unless he's not still a great player on the NFL level. That's when I think but going into the process, one general manager I talked to was like, I don't care. Like, he's like, we don't set it up great for him anyway. He kind of ran through the process at the combine, and, he's like, and then another GM, and I thought it was astute. He's like, been staring at the guy forever. He can only go down. Like at this point, like there is an element of overexposure that can happen with him, that he's so perfect. We start to look for anything that's not perfect. And like one of the things he said is, say he runs a 4.5, right? We watch him on tape. He's running away from guys. Like that 4.5 is fast. He's running football fast. So that 4.5 translates to being super fast on the football field. But we looked at all these wide receivers, and, Xavier Worthy runs a 4.21, and then you got all these guys running 4.3s, low 4.3s, mid 4.3s. And then say Marvin gets out there and he runs like a 4.52. Are we going to be like, oh my gosh, like, man, that's just in this group. Wow. He's now look at the wide receiver speed group. He's near the bottom. That's not great, So like Puka Nacua, right? What did Puka Nacua run? Like a 4.62 at the combine? Like I think he ran like the low 4.6s. There were other things too that obviously caused him to drop in the draft, but he was perfect in the gauntlet. Probably should have paid closer attention to that than we ultimately did. And he was super fast while being perfect in the gauntlet.
No, it's such a good question. I'm working on some reporting right now about Gauntlet 40. What do we actually think is the best predictor of gameplay speed? And I think what's interesting is, how does Scout tell me, like, it depends what you're looking for. Like, are you looking for the guy to be the straight line, take the top off the defense? Or are you looking for him to make that contested catch? And so I kind of liked that nuance of, it's not that the 40 is outdated. It's just, who are you trying to look at it for? The one thing I do wonder is, I think you make really good points about why Marvin Harrison Jr. has more to lose than to gain by running the 40 and doing other drills. But I do think, going back to what you were saying about the data, it's interesting because a lot of teams will use some of these measurements as their starting point for player development and saying like, hey, because we have this benchmark and because we understand what worked for players who had similar measurements, here's how we go. So if you're those teams, do you want, I get you can't make him do it before you draft him, but do you want him to show up and do a gauntlet drill and do some of these things just so you have an understanding of what he most needs to work on, or what's going to be the best use of his time in OTAs and training camp?
What if you always want to have the full workout profile of all the elite players, right? Like I would want to have that. I would want to know what I love Marvin Harrison, Jr. as a professional athlete. He's an amazing player. Let me look at his athletic profile, and now that's a benchmark maybe for some other players that I'm comparing to. Or I'm trying to make a decision down the line 5, 6, 10 years from now between two wide receivers. And one of them compares really favorably to Marvin Harrison Jr.'s athletic profile and the tape, and the other doesn't, but the tape's great. But the athletic profile, maybe that helps you to make a decision between those two. I just think I don't know. It's just frustrating to me. There is an element of it being a job interview, and not everybody is Matt Damon and you can just walk in, or Will Hunting, right? Not everybody's Will Hunting and can just walk in and do the math and say, screw you, you're going to offer me the job no matter what. I don't even think Marvin, falls into that category. And also, I mean, come on, there were a lot of great players still went through the process, right? It's bothersome. And Jane Daniels just deciding at the combine, I'm not going to even show up to weights and measures. I'm like, dude, you're not even going to let people figure out how tall you are yet, or how much you really weigh right now, or like.
And on that note, again, do I think Caleb Williams is going to go number one? Yes. Do I think he's probably going to have a great NFL career? I do think so. But when he didn't do all the medical evaluations at the combine, I had a top personnel guy at a team who's drafted in the second half of the first round tell me look at this Trey Lance situation. Like, if something happens like that where he doesn't pan out and we don't have the baseline medical from a few years ago, how do you then feel as comfortable going to get him? Like, if you want that second chance of your career, like there is some degree. A lot of this is outdated. It's also the way the system works, and there can be consequences if things don't pan out. But you've got a couple guys who are at the top and who are in a good enough place now that it's not going to impact when they get drafted. It just might impact what happens in years 3, 4, or 5 of their career.